as I mentioned, they are from PandaDoc. This roundtable today is going to be on how you can pivot your product and sales strategy in 3 data-backed steps. Okay, so joining us today, we have Michael Paladino. So Michael is an experienced head of sales with a demonstrated history of working in the computer software industry. He's skilled in leadership, sales, sales operations, sales enablement, revenue operations, and production. Welcome, Michael. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah. The pleasure is mine.
Awesome. And our other guest today, Jim Donovan. So Jim's 20-plus year career in sales has generated over $1 billion in revenue across 5 major enterprises in media, SaaS, finance, and mobile industries. He specializes in B2B and B2C revenue generation and has decades of experience regularly creating hundreds of millions in revenue quotas. So Jim Donovan, thank you for joining us as well.
It's great to see you again, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
You too. Really looking forward to this, guys. Yeah, I think we can get started. We're going to pop that link in Slack. So remember to tell your friends if they're not on here that they can, and then other people in Slack will see it and they'll be able to hop on too. But yeah, I'll hand it over to you guys.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sarah. And I've got a presentation here. Should I go ahead and share my screen? Is that okay? All right.
Go for it.
Perfect. So folks, thank you so much for meeting with Mike and I today. We're really excited to share the content with you on, obviously we've all gone through the pandemic together now, and 6 months later, we've all learned a lot. So we're really excited to share with you a few key things that we've learned that have helped us actually take advantage of the pandemic and really help our technology, which is out there to fuel remote teams, really meet the moment. So Mike and I are going to take you through those strategies today, and we're looking forward to engaging with you and having some feedback. We also have some fun polls where we're going to be stopping and asking for you to chime in and chat. So without any further delay, let's get started. Pal, you ready?
Yes, sir.
All right, here we go. Again, some other housekeeping webinar. If you're having any trouble with your audio or if you have any questions, just we'll have an opportunity at the end there to get to those. We are recording this, so you'll be able to follow up if you have any items that you wanted to take a look at. And again, we'll share the slides at the end. So we did have 3 major insights that we're going to share. We also found that we wanted to take advantage of and find industries that were still growing through the pandemic. That's one of our tips that we'll talk about. We also wanted to talk about how to get your customers to the product faster. Super important. Speed is always critical. And then we're introducing this idea of ABT as a replacement for what we've all always known as ABC or always be closing. And that's just the idea that you always want to be training. And we'll talk more about that as we get into it. Pal, do you want to touch on our state of deals 3 key elements that we identified?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did a serious amount of data analysis over the end of June and the summer months, so that we could kind of track how our funnel was performing before, during, and sort of on the outskirts now of the pandemic. And what we noticed were these 3 main driving indicators of our success during that time. So a 38% increase in the number of deals at the end of June. So what did this mean? It meant that our funnel was actually increasing in a major way from a demand standpoint, and Jim sort of touched on why. PandaDoc is a solution that tends to bolster the remote workflow. So we got lucky there in the fact that our application added value already to a remote workplace, and that demand was obviously increasing throughout the pandemic. And obviously businesses are pivoting now to largely remote solutions, even as we're starting to kind of come out of it here. So the landscape's certainly changing, and I think that will be something relevant in years to come. Also, 5 to 2, the current numbers of doc viewers has decreased by 3 people. So another great value prop of our solution, not to keep talking about PandaDoc, but we're able to track the number of decision makers or viewers on our proposals and on our quotes. So what we've noticed in the past was much larger buying committees, 5 folks or more, tend to be viewing or interacting with the proposals and quotes that we were sharing. And a lot of this is actually tracked by some of our customer data as well. So what are we learning here? trim the fat a little bit in the evaluation committee of certain solutions. And I think that buyers became a whole lot more pragmatic during, not to be intense, but a wartime situation where every dollar matters, every minute matters. So they trimmed down those decision-making committees. And then lastly, highest average completion rate PandaDoc customers have ever seen. So again, to go back to sort of pragmatic buying, the folks that got into funnel, they weren't playing any games. They needed to actually get some value from a solution that folks were providing. So what we're seeing there is mid-funnel conversions at the very least increasing by a major rate. So these are the three sort of quantifiable data sets that we noticed during the sample period. Jim, is there anything you want to add?
No, the one that stands out to me the most, that I like the most, is that middle one, the idea that people are making decisions faster. There's less decision makers involved in the cycle. And so that is inherently just creating a more transactional environment for all of us. That doesn't mean that we don't want to still be looking for opportunities to expand. And so you're going to want to make sure that you have an equal focus on an expansion strategy, because we're bringing deals in faster as a result of COVID. And so you don't want to capture any of that, expansion opportunity post-sale. Other than that, though, great summary. So we'll keep moving. This is a visual of how has our actual strategy changed. And one of the things that you can see at the top there, that now at the top of our hierarchy of priorities was this pandemic, was COVID-19. And what we realized really quickly was, as long as we kept our people above everything, and as long as we put our people first in our decision-making, we were going to be okay. That was the immediate step that we took as a leadership team, was take care of the team. Make sure everybody's mental health is okay, make sure everybody feels safe, and make sure everybody feels like they can keep staying productive. And then we got really excited to say, okay, now we're in the situation that we're in. How can we go from being reactive to proactive? How can we take not advantage of the pandemic, but how can we really drive maximum value for PandaDoc throughout a pretty difficult time? And so 3 things came up for us. The first one was, let's find some new industries, right? We know that there's a lot of other companies that are going through the exact same challenges we are right now. Let's attach ourselves to those companies, learn about those industries, and find new ways to partner with them. So we had a lot of success in that. And specifically, we found education was an amazing vertical for us. A lot of remote learning meant that there was a lot of forms that needed to be filled out. A lot of documentation had to be passed back and forth between parents and teachers. PandaDoc had a really phenomenal intersection with those 2 events. And 15% of our closed-won revenue in June and July came from a brand new category that we were able to sniff out together and really go after hard. And it really delivered for us. What created the momentum for us is the item in the middle, and this was really the game changer for us. Our CEO, a really brilliant visionary named Nikita, actually came out and said, you know what, if we're going to put people first, let's actually create a free product to put everybody first. And so we launched a free product, and that enabled the entire world to be able to come and sample PandaDoc. And it also created new opportunities for us to learn more about our ICP and ways to convert those free customers to paying customers. And then that speaks to the last part. Now that we're going to have tens of thousands of new people in the funnel, we had to look at our processes and ask ourselves really hard questions. Are we ready to scale? Can we scale underneath our current mode, or do we need to make some changes? We're still in the process of making changes. I'm sure all of you are. And managing sales means constant change. We all know that. But taking a hard look at your process and asking yourself, is what we established as the right way a year ago still the right way today? Chances are, especially in the midst of a pandemic, that answer was going to have changed, and it had for us. So we've updated a lot of processes. We've added a lot of processes. And we've hired a lot of talented people that are smarter than all of us, that have history on setting up these architectures. And we've asked them to come in and teach us. And that's sort of a last thing I'll share is, hopefully, like us, you've all had to be in a position where you've been super vulnerable over the last 6 months, and just accepting what's happening and being willing and open to learning. And that was something else that we had to do, is not just update our process, but we had to update our mindset too. But it's really paid off for us. We've found new verticals. We've launched a free product, which has connected us to 40,000 new prospects to talk to. And our processes are tightening up daily. Let's keep moving. Oh, sorry, Pal, anything you'd add there?
No, I think I could do some summarization on the next slide, which kind of gives almost a too long didn't read version of what we just discussed there. As Jim mentioned, it was education and healthcare were those two new industries that really started to pop. And the second bullet here, listen to the sales team, listen to your funnel, be relentless to the finish. The way I describe this is really just lean into what the data is telling you. We're lucky enough to have a pretty large inbound engine at PandaDoc. And while we noticed education and healthcare popping up on a volume and a demand standpoint, we're obviously trying to toy with outbound and try to kick doors open in new verticals as much as we possibly can. So we were doubling down, not just relying on the inbound that was coming in from the education and the healthcare, but training our teams to actually target these from an outbound standpoint. And obviously we saw the 15% of our closed won coming from these types of verticals. I would say that number is probably 70 or 80% when we talk about our outbound revenues. So, listen to what the data is telling you and follow the inbound and lean in there when you're maybe going through times of tough demand. The other piece here, drop what's not working, double down on what is. So like I was saying, doubling down with the outbound efforts there, and pivot and follow what the data and the verticals are telling you to do. And you're going to have a nice little nest egg during difficult times. And one other thing was, as we started to get involved more in healthcare specifically, we took a peek at some of our compliance, processes like Jim was mentioning. And we realized that by simply asking our product team to give us some validation on whether or not we were HIPAA compliant or not, resulted in a resounding yes very quickly, which allowed us to sort of double down on the marketing spend and try to start driving more of those types of customers to our website and to our free product. These are just a little bit more detailed versions of this. It looks like there's a question from Toby in the chat here. Sarah, is it cool if I address that now? Is that what we're doing? Cool. Toby asked, how much of your inbound comes from integrations? We certainly have some strategic partnerships, Toby. Largely Salesforce, HubSpot, and Pipedrive, like you mentioned there. In our earlier years, largely HubSpot driven, a partnership that was very, very essential to our early success and even our funding round. So a large portion of our inbound is CRM driven. And those three that I mentioned are the top CRMs that we play with.
Let's keep moving. We got our first poll here. So the question here is, how many new verticals have you connected to since COVID? And feel free to just go ahead into chat and share with us any answers you have. And while we're doing that, we'll just keep moving and talking about some of our content. So we did other actions that we took. We monitored our speed to lead. This is really critical. As you might imagine, the faster you get to the lead, the higher probability that you have to close that. But the data is really, really important on this. It shows that if you get to a lead in under 5 minutes, you increase your probability of closing that lead successfully by 90%. That's staggering statistics, right? So it means that beyond the 6 minute, 7 minute, eighth minute and beyond, you're just seeing a massive decrease and just a full nosedive. So you really want to architect your entire engine to meet that speed as if it's a grenade that's about to go off. It matters to the client experience because we have to remember also when people are submitting inquiries, they're oftentimes submitting multiple inquiries at once to evaluate multiple providers. And so you want to be the first to get back to them. That will help. You also want to look at automating processes with digital workflows. Obviously, PandaDoc recommends itself, but you need to have a vendor like PandaDoc in your stack so that you can understand the documents that are moving around inside and outside your company, see who's looking at those documents, what pages they're spending time on. And if you don't have this kind of insights into your document workflow, you're missing a massive data point that can really help you scale. Improve your lead scoring and implement lead scoring. So we have an amazing RevOps team. These are when you talk about loving data, our RevOps team lives and breathes data. And they did something really tremendous for the sales team amongst the pandemic, excuse me. They actually created a hyper visual lead scoring module. And at PandaDoc, obviously the panda is our mascot. And they actually created it where it's one panda face, two panda face, three panda faces being the best, one panda face being the lowest lead score. And that visual cue allowed our SDRs to actually point themselves at our highest value leads faster and prioritize their queues according to what was actually going to convert better for you. It seems like elementary, simple economics, but that visual cue is actually the changer for us, right? Because we look now for the three pandas. We sort based on three pandas, and all of our activities are based off of our highest value. I think that's very important to be mindful of. And then we created a lot of new communication channels with our prospects. In the last session, both Aaron and who was the other gentleman?
Colin.
Colin, thank you. Referenced text. I'm a huge fan of this, and I want to shout it out to everybody today. Text, text, text. It works. Make sure it's permission-based, that you have the permission and it's familiar. But if you can have a text exchange with a prospect, you are far, far along in the sales cycle, much further along than a standard email, in the olden days. So let's take a quick look and see how many new verticals others have connected to, just like PandaDoc has. Let's see what we've got here. Oh, just some more questions.
We had a couple comments on that one. We had Travis said education and healthcare, two verticals that seem to have a new need for SaaS tools. So it sounds like they pivoted there. I chimed in. We prioritized at least two segments that we maybe wouldn't have thought as top of the pick as a result of COVID, considering the same type of thing. Like who are the people that are thriving in this scenario and versus who are the people that are struggling?
Great. And do you see old school outbound cold calls continuing to decline in favor of inbound? What percentage of strategy is outbound versus inbound? I don't think old school will ever go away. So as far as, will outbound always exist? I think so. I think it will mature and, reconfigure how we approach outbound. Text messaging is a great example of that. Perhaps text messaging will be more involved in our outbound motion moving forward. But I also think that what technology is doing for the inbound funnel is pretty spectacular. So today we do experience a tremendous amount of volume from our inbound funnel, but right now it's actually our outbound motion that's also taking off because of what Mike Paladino shared relative to education and healthcare. We know we can get into these verticals now, and so we're charging hard after. Pal, would you add anything else on these slides?
No, not really. I mean, but to just address Joe's question like one more time, it's, I agree with Jim that the outbound mechanism, you got to keep that motion going. And to Travis's point here, you got to control what you can control. And inbound demand, we got lucky during COVID, right? So we're reaping the benefits of that. But if we hadn't, and it was maybe a different story there, I can tell you right now, we would be tripling down on our outbound efforts to try to create some level of control over the funnel instead of relying on demand.
Great points. Let's keep moving. Sorry there, I messed that up. All right, so what are some other ways that we wanted to get our customers to see our product faster? Beyond that free sign that I mentioned earlier, which was a brilliant way for our CEO to not only, again, take care of people first, but also expand the PandaDoc footprint, we also launched toll-free. This was twofold. First off, there's always the question of, should you have toll-free? Do you need toll-free? But remember, when we go remote, more people wanted to connect with us. And so the thought process was, let's create an omni-channel approach where it doesn't matter if it's chat, it doesn't matter if it's phone, email, However the prospect wants to engage with us, we can create a comfortable environment for them to do so. And then again, I can hate to keep harping on this, but I want, today's Own Your Growth Summit is about providing you tips that are really going to equip you with success. Texting and leaning into texting is an element that will drive more success for you. So if Text Us or any of the texting vendors are out there today watching, I hope this is a helpful plug for you. Pal, on our next slide, take us through it if you don't mind. Oh, wait, there we go. Oh, one more.
Yeah, no sweat. So, this ties pretty well with the last slide of toll free. Basically, just try to remove as much friction as you possibly can with your prospects getting in touch with your product or with your sales folks. But what can we control, right? A relentless focus on activity. So we had to scrutinize individuals from an activity standpoint, and part of that was just the worry that folks moving to a remote workload might, get a little bit lazy sitting at home as opposed to getting up, going in their commute and heading into the office. So we actually tried to make this interactive, and we created sort of challenges for folks to build outbound lists, really stay on top of the activities that folks are using to activate against those lists. Definitely tracking the activity will manufacture your month, but bullet point number 3 was probably the most valuable learning for us, which is kind of in line with the healthcare topics from before, but following what is working and taking a path of least resistance based on where you're winning the most. And for us, that was healthcare and that was in education. So fracking is a term we use to, everybody knows it probably from oil and gas industry. But for us, it's like, oh, we got a whiff that healthcare is a good vertical for us. Let's drill into that and try to create 5 more healthcare accounts, maybe per rep. And now we're actually at a point where we're trying to assign vertical captains for folks that are able to successfully frack on an outbound mechanism, even throwing more SDR support and resources at the individuals who have shown success in doing this tactic. So trying to encourage folks to really get out there and kick down doors, but at the same time, back them up with some firepower when we see it working. So fracking, I think, is a very important approach, especially when you're worried about how the market might be reacting at a given moment. But that's it for this slide, Jim.
All right. Another poll here is, how many trainings and role plays are you doing a month? 0, 1 to 5, 6 to 10, or 10 plus? Real quick on this one, just to share our, again, this next portion here was to talk about ABT, or always be training. Role playing is critical. So it does not matter how seasoned of a salesperson you are. Role playing is the going to the gym for a salesperson, right? It's keeping that sales muscle sharp. And so we've actually gotten into a mode where we role play twice a week on both Tuesdays and Thursdays as a team. Giant Zoom calls where anybody can get called on at any moment. And, we go into real life talk tracks that we experience with our prospects. And we learn a lot. First off, we laugh a lot, right? Because it's always funny to see how we each of our styles in action. But also that's where the best learning of, you hear just a little nugget of something that somebody says, and then you attach to it, make it your own, and infuse it into your own talk track. We've also, noticed that the more that we train, the better our conversions were going up. And that obviously leads to more revenue. So it's a no-brainer. Training makes people feel good. It makes them feel like you're investing in them and that you're helping them get better. And so there's also the mental health aspect of what comes along with it. And then, training turns startups like ours into a more professional sales culture. So it's all about, refining our talk tracks and learning from each other. And more than anything, I always say, failure is good. Failure is helpful. Failure is how we improve. And if you can be in a role-playing setting or training setting where you can create that environment where your team feels safe to fail, it's better that we fail amongst each other in a role-playing setting than on a real live demo with a prospect. So anything else you'd add here on training, pal?
Just that this was really key going into a remote workload or workflow, because it was a way for us to connect in a valuable way, but also just as human beings. So it definitely kept us together and allowed us to maintain some semblance of consistent culture, even if we weren't able to speak to each other in person.
That's a great point. And Toby, you're making a great point too. There is a lot of mentoring that goes into role playing. So you have to be targeted with your time there. And sometimes you have to select out those that you know are having weaker conversion to try to get them to practice more in front of others. So very good point. All right. Also, sorry, let me just check the chat real fast. I know we're coming up here just 5 minutes more. And let's see, we've got a handful of responses, 1 to 5, 1 to 5. Hey, good. As long as it sounds like everybody is trying to do a little bit of role playing each week, and that's the whole point. So that's great. All right. So as we're wrapping up here, just some questions that we wanted to make sure we put out there as teasers for each of these 3 main items. First off, again, at the top of everything, just put your people first. It is the easiest thing to do. And when it comes to priority, if you're always asking yourself, how will my people feel about this? How will the team react to this? You're going to have a better answer. When you're looking for new industries, ask yourself what industries are outside your ICP that are still growing. Perhaps your ICP is changing and you're not even aware of it because different factors are happening. But always be asking yourself of that question of who else is still growing. Pal, do you want to take the free product one?
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of mentioned this a little bit here, but again, it's just how can you get products to your customer faster? Removing friction points and getting folks stuck to your product is always the right practice. But specifically, while this was a very, very nice thing for us to do to try to add some value in the marketplace in a free manner, there was some strategy behind it as well, because now we have thousands and thousands of more users stuck to our app that we could potentially go to try to upsell into a paid product suite. So it was a beautiful nicety from our founder, but also as a sales leader, made me lick my chops a little bit about the opportunity to potentially expand on a lot of those new trialers or product users.
And then last but not least, Pal talked about the updating of our activity process. And one thing that we've done recently is regulate calling activity or regulate certain activities. And what we've already seen that's quickly happening is we're seeing more ops in our pipe. So our pipe is growing. We're seeing more obviously convert to close one. And again, the more that you drive that activity and drive more pipe and drive more close one, the happier your sales team is going to be because it's just more commission for them. So while there is always the double-edged sword of managing activity, what I'd say here is, I think earlier somebody asked a question about ratio of inbound to outbound. I don't believe in 100 dial a day, outbound volume, because I think it lacks targeted focus. But even if you're just prescribing somewhere between 10 and 20, targeted outreach a day, start somewhere. Something is absolutely always going to be better than nothing is what I can share there. So, and I think, yep, there we go. So that brings us to our last slide, which just has, some links for you where you can go to see additional information from our community. Any questions?
Joe just asked a great question, actually.
Take it
The question is, you're concerned about devaluing your current paid offerings with your existing client base. Joe, this is a struggle, not just when we were releasing a free product, but we also have, I don't know if this is the case with your business, we also have a self-service business that we're competing with to an extent as well. So anytime we talk about even a minor change to product features and suites, I get a little nervous, because it's like, oh, it's working now. Why do we want to break this and make it more competitive, right? That said, I think it's really crucial for the sales folks to get together with the product marketing folks and the product managers to ensure that whatever free version you give out will not do that, Joe. So specifically for us, we created it with competition in mind. How can we make something that is somewhat feature parity with a DocuSign or like a Hello Sign, but really use it more as a marketing engine to get, like I was saying, more folks stuck to the product and get more daily active users that we can use as a mechanism to expand. So there definitely was some fear there. But that said, it ended up being one of, like we're saying here, one of the major contributors as to why we've been able to continue with our 62.5 growth rate in 2020.
And folks, one of the last things I'll leave you with, I just put in chat, are 2 quick hashtags that I would ask for you to Google and check out. As you can see, my background today is a red stripe across the white. That's actually the Belarusian flag. Belarus is where our founder, Nikita and Sergey, are from originally. And I just wanted to share that we actually, unfortunately, have had 4 of our employees detained and arrested illegally, from our perspective, because of Europe's last dictator, Alexander Lukashenko. So if you get a moment, please just put some attention on what's going on there. We're trying to raise awareness because as a company, not only are we going through the pandemic, but PandaDoc simultaneously is up against some pretty really difficult times for those 4 employees, and we just want to bring some attention to it. So with that, Sarah and everybody, thank you so much for coming in today.
Have you got time for one last question, just because we've got you here? And we're a PandaDoc. We use PandaDoc as part of our sales cycle. Have you got any good examples of are there any clever sort of PandaDoc hacks or ways you've seen your customers use PandaDoc really well to in their sales process?
One thing I personally really enjoy about PandaDoc's interface is you can actually watch in real time as the signature is going into the box. And so you can actually sync up with your prospect. And, when you're talking about being at the end of the cycle and saying, hey, are you ready to sign? They might be saying, oh, yeah. And you can actually tell them, well, I'm in there looking at it right now. If you want to go ahead, I can help you, draw your first signature. That's one thing I personally like about it. If you don't mind, I'm actually going to also call on Quincy Berg. He's actually one of our #1 sellers, and he is the person that has really helped us break into that education vertical. And so he might have a good tip for you to share here as well. Q, you got anything you want to share there, Tony?
For sure. Yeah. Sorry, I'm coming in late, guys, but great question. So one of the biggest things for my process is just getting the person to look at the proposal initially. So I deliver the document out through PandaDoc, and then the next day I'll follow up and just say, hey, here's a copy of your proposal. Hope you have a great day. And you can generate a link to the document through PandaDoc, and you can just stick it in the email. Sometimes I find people are just used to seeing emails, and that will drive the person to actually open the document. That's like one of the biggest parts of my process is of course, just getting someone to look at it the first time.
Great stuff, Quincy. And Toby, honestly, I would talk to you for hours about this topic if you want to offline. Really happy to do that.
And thank you for being a customer, by the way.
Yeah. Anybody else? We do have a couple of minutes here. The next session starts at noon in the live stream. So if you guys are watching the next one, you don't have to hop there until, a couple minutes before that. So why don't we see if there's anyone else? And Toby, that was great via voice. I'd love if anyone else has a question, say it out loud, like like we're all in a room together. That would be great. I actually did have a question. I will ask it while we see if anything else comes in here. At the beginning, you mentioned that statistic that you guys have found that the amount of different buyers involved in signing has gone from 5 to 2. So you've lost those 3 people that normally would all be looking at it. And you mentioned you think there's a bit of a shift towards a more of a transactional nature in these sales because people have less time. I've actually heard from other thought leaders a conflicting opinion, and I would love to hear what you guys think about this. I've heard it was Lisa Earl McLeod, who was a guest on our podcast, who said she thinks because buyers now have less time, they care much more about like a personalized experience, and actually a transactional experience where it's just about, this is a vendor, I'm just going to sign and pay, is a less appealing experience. So she found even a potentially larger buying committee because there's, smaller budgets and it's more competition for those budgets. And yeah, I just wonder what you guys think about that.
Definitely. So it all depends from my perspective on the type of product that's being sold. So if it's a more complex sale, definitely their cycles probably not only elongated, but perhaps they're even seeing larger purchases also. In our SaaS environment, it truly has been about the speed. In fact, when we were talking to Quincy earlier today, we were regaling on the fact that these education clients, they actually have a real need with an immediate deadline, right? Because there's things like school starting. And so you have to get the form in before school starts. And so, so much of our transactional business comes from deadline driven events as well. But I'm certain that, any colleagues that are experiencing, counter opinions are probably in a more complex sale than perhaps PandaDoc is.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
Indeed. The other piece there is I think that our tool actually lends credence to a more personalized version of the bottom of the funnel. So while there's less viewers in there, and I think that's due to some of the stuff we were talking about previously, where we're tightening the belt and people aren't letting go of revenue so much, they're actually getting to closer to decision makers only really viewing stuff as opposed to some committee. And so personalizing that, even in a transactional matter, I do think has impacted us in a positive way. But to Jim's point as well, I think it also depends on the verticals that you might be targeting. If you're talking to enterprise customers, of course, moving into a tough market period is going to drive a little bit more, let's say, shrewdness when it comes to purchasing. That said, if you're selling something that's value adding to either efficiency or revenue generation, those are the types of tools that are always going to be in play, without any sort of market dependency taking place externally.
Cool. Thanks for answering that.
Oh, of course. And Travis, in chat, you had a question about tips for transitioning your sales reps' mindsets from being overly reliant with inbound and more confident and hungry for outbound. Definitely. We've been working through this at PandaDoc. Again, he's here, so I'm going to point to Quincy because we've actually been using Quincy to help solve some of these challenges. First thing is show success. Demonstrate it's possible through somebody that everybody respects. That's Quincy as an example. On our sales team, everybody looks to Quincy as a mentor. And so seeing him succeed meant, gosh, if Quincy can do it, I can do it too. Build that belief in them. We also, this was Pal's idea, and I really commend him for this, but we also just started to share copies of commission checks from sellers that were experiencing a lot of success at outbound, and just really show them pretty quickly, hey, it's your choice, right? But if you go a little outbound, look what happens. And that is, we're salespeople, and the way our brains are operated, that worked really well for our team as well. So show them that they can do it and build that belief, and then also show them the actual money. And that's generally a pretty good recipe for success. And let's see what else we got in here. Commission checks. Yep. Asking about getting reps to understand outbound works and building that muscle. Yep, absolutely. I saw somebody say this earlier too, and I agree completely. Outbound is entirely controllable versus inbound. You're in a much more reactive state. So,
just to add something that we've found, and one of the reasons it might help other people. One of the strengths we found of using PandaDocs is that because one of our objectives is to increase the number of repeat customers. So before we kind of implemented a more robust sign-off process and a kind of something that it was just emails going backwards and forwards. And one of the reasons that we're using PandaDoc is that for our kind of to work with more kind of reliable, bigger customers, they need that kind of more robust kind of sign-off and approval and a process work through. So for me, that's been one of the strengths of PandaDoc in the whole kind of virtual in a virtual selling. You have to look and be. It's not just a question of looking like you're more robust. You actually have to be more robust, and something like a PandaDoc document signing solution helps you do that. So that's been one of the real strengths of the tool for us.
Toby, you feel like a plant today, man. Thank you.
Yeah,
so
sorry.
much.
I'm sorry. Well, I think I got invited because I'm a PandaDoc customer, but that's the only reason. I promise you. Yeah.
They paid you to be here.
Next time. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think this is wrapping up to a conclusion here. Guys, as I mentioned, Michael and Jim are both going to be in that Slack channel for the next 15 minutes. So anything that you didn't get a chance to ask here, they're going to be there. They can do that. And as Michael mentioned, it sounds like they're interested in having these conversations even beyond there. If you guys, actually, yeah, good question would be, how can people connect with you aside from the Slack community to have a further discussion in future?
LinkedIn is always a tremendous place to grab us. So by all means, please do.